Good afternoon, everybody. This is Tuck Talk number 18, the Anunnaki and the Matrix. Friedrich Nietzsche once wrote that those who were dancing appeared insane to those who could not hear the music. Well, I can hear the music, and I'm going to do a little dance for you today. And I believe I'm sane. Now, I've heard sanity expressed as the ability and the willingness to face reality. And I've always certainly been willing to do that. And the willingness and the ability to face reality is directly proportional to your level of sanity. Now, having said that, I gotta warn you that this is blue pill, red pill decision time for you viewers. The information that I'm about to present, if you have not encountered it before, it's gonna turn your world upside down. This is heavy duty stuff. The inference is that we've been lied to since the beginning of time. And why should we care about that? I once had the experience of living with a compulsive liar. And she had a couple of children. And we both worked. And we sent her children to be looked after by a woman who charged us $500 a week to do so. And at the end of each week, I would say to my partner, "Hey, did you pay the babysitter?" "Yep." She'd say, "I paid the babysitter." Next week, "Yep, I paid the babysitter." Well, 3 months later, I got a phone call from the babysitter saying, "Hey, Gary, how come you haven't paid us?" I said, "What?" "Yeah, you owe us $6,000. Wow. And I said, "I'll look into that." And of course, I approached my partner and I said, "Why did you lie to me? Every week I asked you if you paid the babysitter and you told me you didn't pay her. Or you told me you paid her." And she just shrugged her shoulders. Well, I learned over time that she was incapable of telling the truth. She was truly a compulsive liar, maybe the only one I've ever met in my whole life, with the exception of the government and any church I've ever known. If I asked my partner what she had for lunch, if she had had a sandwich, she would told me she ate soup. If I asked her what she had done the day before, if she had gone to the mall, she would tell me that she had gone to a show. She was just incapable of telling the truth. She immediately reverted to a lie. And for many thousands of years, the same thing's been done to mankind. And I'm going to present some information to give you a taste of the scope that has been done to us. And I hope you spend some time and consider why they did it, what they're hiding. Most people that lie have something to hide. That's usually the primary motivation for telling a lie. And how that's affected you and your sense of reality, your sense of truth, and the way you're living your life. In the end, if I have a goal, it's simply to present you with a degree of truth that then you can use to fashion a more real existence for yourself based on the new information. Enjoy. The Anunnaki and the Matrix.
This isn't real.
What is real? How do you define real? If you're talking about what you can feel, what you can smell, what you can taste and see, then real is simply electrical signals interpreted by your brain.
The modern revelation of this incredible story actually began in 1849 when Sir Austin Henry Layard who was an English archaeologist and global explorer, found himself in what we now know as Iraq, a land which was previously known as Ancient Sumeria, the cradle of human civilization. I'm no expert on ancient civilizations, but it's my belief that through wars and conflict and conquering of one country over another, one civilization over another, that ancient Acadia and ancient Babylon replaced ancient Sumeria in the same basic geographical region over a large number of years. So Layard's expedition was part of a mid-19th century initiative of European institutions and governments that funded expeditions to Mesopotamia to find physical evidence to corroborate events described in the Bible. What these explorers found instead, however, was that the Bible, previously thought to be the oldest book in the world and comprised of original stories, actually drew upon much older Sumerian literature. There, among the ruins of ancient Babylon in southern Mesopotamia, he discovered the first pieces of what would eventually become one of the most incredible archaeological finds ever. Thousands of clay tablets containing the oldest writing ever discovered on our planet. The one that's pictured here is a famous one known as the King's List, and it details hundreds of thousands of years of reigning kings in the area. These clay tablets were inscribed with cuneiform writing, in this case, and then fired or baked to harden them. And that's why they were able to survive this incredible time span and still be readable and still in the relatively pristine condition that we see them in here. At the time that they were discovered, nobody knew how to read them. The ancient Sumerian cuneiform was a new language to our relatively modern scholars. However, it was discovered that there was some duplication in Akkadian literature and Babylonian literature that allowed them to start making inroads on learning how to read the language. And over a period of time, people that knew how to translate the writing developed and grew in number. The second form of documents that were found on the clay tablets was pictographs, like the one that we're looking at here. This is a character that we're going to talk about in great detail a little later on, known as Enki. And he's carrying a pine cone here, which is directly related to the pineal gland in the human brain. Another article of note here, my research indicates that this is a bag of pollen, which is indicative of colonization and seeding humanity and things of that nature. You'll note that the character here is winged, and we'll talk about the implications of that. And this one's really cool. My God, the guy's either wearing a bracelet or he's got a wristwatch on here. But that's kind of fascinating for something that ancient. Here's another famous clay tablet, and I'd like you to hone in on the top left of this diagram, where you'll see a picture of our solar system. Now, the sun is obviously in the center of a large group of planets. Man very, very early made jars stand up nearly perpendicular. And what's incredible here is that there was absolutely no way for a person standing on Earth to be aware of these outer planets. In particular, Neptune, Uranus, Pluto. There is no way you can see those with the naked eye from the planet Earth, and yet these people have them documented in clay tablets. These clay tablets have been dated as being between 2,500 to 9,000 years old. To put this into perspective,
the Old Testament of the Holy Bible that we now know is said to have been written in Hebrew 2,300 to 2,500 years ago. This is important. The writing on these clay tablets predates the Old Testament by up to 6,500 years in some cases. In fact, much of the information contained in the Old Testament as we know it is simply a radically censored and edited version of information found in these much older clay tablets. The information that was omitted from the Old Testament, but included in these tablets, is the most incredible story you will ever hear. It begs the question, why have most of us not heard about it? Well, the reason for me doing the video is to tell you about it. In fact, it could change your perception about everything you think you know about who we are and where we came from. And the implications of this discovery includes the fact that the majority of human beings have been intentionally lied to since the beginning of recorded history by politicians and religious authorities, and that this intentional deception continues to this very day. To continue with our tale, the years went by and people learned how to read the ancient Sumerian writing. One of these was a researcher and author named Zecharia Sitchen, and he worked for 30 years translating these tablets up until his death in 2010. He wrote a series of books during this time that have been translated in over 25 languages. The tablets, he concludes, attribute the beginnings of Mesopotamian society to a race of extraterrestrial beings known as the Anunnaki, a term which translates as those who from heaven to earth came. The Anunnaki traveled to Earth from a planet called Nibiru, the home of this technologically advanced, human-like extraterrestrial race. The authors of the tablets recorded detailed and accurate information about our own and distant star systems, why the Anunnaki came here, and what they did. Let's start with talking a little bit about the planet Nibiru. Now, Nibiru is a planet that, according to the clay tablets, is located within our own solar system. We all know that Mercury, Venus, Earth, Mars, Jupiter, Saturn, Uranus, Neptune, and Pluto travel counterclockwise around our own sun. However, Nibiru has an orbit that, according to the text, is elliptical, and they go clockwise around the sun, and a single rotation takes 36,000 years, which, of course, in comparison to our own planet, which takes 1 year to get around the sun. So, when the naysayers start to talk about why we don't know about the existence of Nibiru, well, this would explain it. It only comes by Earth once every 36,000 years. Sorry, I've got that wrong. Once every 3,600 years. Excuse me. I fell down into the rabbit hole on this story just before Christmas, and my entire Christmas break was spent doing research and following as many different paths as I could to try to get a grasp on this amazing information. I apologize for any inaccuracies that might come out of my mouth. I absorbed an awful lot in the last 3 weeks on this subject. So, Nibiru was suffering from atmospherical problems. It's hypothesized that the planet was heated internally and that too much heat was escaping through the atmosphere and that it was going to lead to the death of the planet. And the scientists on the planet had determined that if they could get a proper amount of gold and turn it into a dust-like form. They could put the particles into their atmosphere, thus reflecting the heat back to the planet that they needed to retain. This is what led to them coming to the planet Earth in the search for gold. 450,000 years ago, approximately, the tablets indicate that these beings first arrived on Earth looking for gold, which they needed to seed the atmosphere of Nibiru and save it from being destroyed. This original group, the rank and file workers of the colonial expedition sent to Earth, found gold in South Africa, and they began to mine it in earnest. Another researcher and explorer by the name of Michael Tellinger has found massive amounts of forensic evidence to support that extensive gold mining did take place in South Africa, and that some of the references in Sitchin's translation of the Sumerian text can be attributed to actual places that are there, with landmarks and megalithic structures that fit the narrative perfectly. Well, to try to keep an awful long story as short as I can, the gold mining went on for a couple of thousand years or so until the Anunnaki workforce got fed up with all the hard work and complained to upper management. To resolve the problem, two brothers of the Nibiru royalty were sent to the planet Earth to straighten things out and find a solution to the problem. These two brothers were Enlil, who was the big boss, the foreman, and Icke, who was a master scientist and a geneticist. Upon observing the situation and finding that Earth did have some existing hominids on it, he decided that he could genetically manipulate the race and turn them into a workforce, which is what he did. He embedded some of the Anunnaki's own genetic material into the beings that he found on Earth and created a workforce who could breed and thus do the gold mining and all the dirty work for them. Well, Enlil wasn't really crazy about this idea right from the beginning. He didn't like the idea of a workforce that had the potential to become as smart and as intelligent and as conscious as the Anunnaki themselves. And over time, it proved that his concerns were correct. The human workers were a pain in the butt. They talked too much, they complained too much, and they began to think too much, is the short and the end of it. Well, cities had been built to house the now modified human workforce, and this is what the Genesis accounts call the Garden of Eden. It was in the Garden of Eden that the human workers were cared for by the gods, the extremely intelligent race that had come from Nibiru. Now, you'll often find in the accounts of Genesis references to a small g, or sons of gods with a small g, and God with a capital G. So all of the Anunnaki people were considered gods with a small g, and the people like Enlil and Enki, well, they were the bosses, so they were gods with a capital G. Hey, we're going back hundreds of thousands of years. Anybody that could fly down to your planet with a spaceship and had hugely advanced equipment to mine gold with and could genetically manipulate species, well, it's not a real stretch that one might consider people gods that could perform those feats in light of one's own limited technological abilities. So, there came a point when Enlil was just totally fed up and didn't like the fact that humans were populating at a prodigious rate and seemed to be just taking over the place, and he kicked them out of Eden. he kicked them out of the city where they were being cared for, and they began to spread across the earth and continued to populate. This took us to a later point in time when the next trauma happened for Enlil. This is when he discovered that his own fellow citizens, the other Anunnaki, had begun having sex with human women. And worse than that, they had begun to impregnate the human women and created a crossbreed of individuals that were even more problematic than the humans themselves. He was completely irate about this and made arrangements to destroy them all through the workings of the Great Flood that we're all familiar with. So, all of this information can be considered pre-Diluvian or pre-flood up until this point. Well, good old Enki comes to the rescue again. He's created humanity, and he's fostered humanity, and he loves his creation, and he doesn't want to see them all get destroyed. So he picks a certain percentage of them and puts them onto Noah's Ark, whether that was a spaceship or a boat, who knows for sure, and he saves some of them. So the flood does in fact take place. Most of humankind is wiped out. The Anunnaki have taken refuge on their spaceships, and they descend back to Earth after the flood and start all over again. The gold mining goes on for a period of time, and for whatever reasons, it's decided that they're gonna withdraw, and at this point, ancient Sumeria is turned into a training ground for humans to teach them how to be civilized. Anybody who researches history will find out that it was in Sumeria that the wheel was invented, that they had their own legal code, that they had high-rise buildings, that they had plumbing. They had all kinds of technologically advanced systems in place that nobody could explain. Where did this giant leap of technology come from? How did these ancient peoples live in such an advanced fashion? Modern-day archaeologists do not have an answer for this question. The Anunnaki, according to the text, are the ones that gave all of this to mankind. And that, my friends, is the quick version of an absolutely amazing and fascinating story. There's some really interesting tie-over points that I'm going to take a moment and read to you out of the King James Version of the Bible. In particular, I'd like to draw your attention to Genesis 1, verse 26. This is in the creation portion in the first chapter of Genesis, and it says, "And God said, let us make man in our image, and after our likeness. So God created man in his own image. In the image of God created he him. Male and female created he them." What I find most fascinating about that passage in 1 Genesis 26, and God said, let us. That's absolutely peculiar from an individual like myself who went to Sunday school and raised to believe that there was only one God. Who's this us in Genesis 1:26? Well, according to the clay tablets, it's the Anunnaki. A little later on, we get to the Genesis 3:22. And Adam and Eve have just eaten of the forbidden fruit. And the Lord God said, "Behold, the man is become as one of us, to know good and evil.
And now, lest he put forth his hand and take also of the tree of life and eat and live forever. Therefore the Lord God sent him forth from the Garden of Eden to till the ground from whence he was taken. Now, I read that verse with this new information, and tilling the ground, well, that could be farming, or it could be mining for gold, but not being allowed to live in the city where they were being taken care of, Eden. And while they had their consciousness increased through the genetic manipulation that had been done by Enki, there are passages in the clay tablets where Enlil had limited the lifespan of human beings to 120 years. And this reference to living forever is probably a reference to that, whereby he didn't want Enki manipulating their genetics to let them live longer. It's reported in the clay tablets that the Anunnaki lived an incredibly long period of time, perhaps even spanning thousands of years, and that they were a very large people. It's hard to get an exact figure, but 9 feet tall wouldn't be out of the question. And some of the artwork that came out of the clay tablets tends to lend credibility to that concept. When we turn the page and we get to Genesis 6, verse 2, we read that the sons of God saw the daughters of men, that they were fair, and they took them wives of all which they chose. Wow, this is the portion where the Anunnaki started breeding human women. I can't really blame them for that. But in verse 4, we also read that there were giants in the earth in those days, and also after that, when the sons of God came in unto the daughters of men, and they bare children to them, the same became mighty men, which were of old of renown.
And it was immediately after this, in Genesis 6, verse 5, and God saw that the wickedness of man was great in the earth, and that every imagination of the thoughts of his heart was only evil continually. And it repented the Lord that he had made man on the earth, and it grieved him at his heart. And the Lord said, I will destroy man whom I have created from the face of the earth. Well, a little later on, Noah apparently gets a pass, and Noah and the animals, they're moving on into the ark in Genesis 7, verse 15. And they went in unto Noah into the ark, 2 and 2 of all flesh, wherein is the breath of life. Wherein is the breath of life. Man, that sounds like a spaceship to me, with air conditioning system. But who knows? Maybe it's just the wording they used. So, here we are. World gets destroyed. The Anunnaki rebuild their gold mining operations. The story is lengthy. What I like about the writings is an explanation for the thousands of pyramids we have all over the planet. In Mesoamerica, South America, Central America, Egypt, Indonesia, China. They're everywhere. We've got these monolithic structures of incredible scale, scope, magnitude, complexity, and architectural marvels that we cannot explain and we cannot duplicate to this very day with our own science. And these writings, these oldest writings on the planet of the Earth, offer us an explanation as to how they came to be there. Another thing that's perplexed modern man, or so it's presented to us, is that the similarities between some of these pyramidal structures and other artifacts that are found around the world, no one can explain how that is. Well, if you got a group of Anunnaki with spaceships cruising around the planet, and creating settlements to mine gold here, there, and everywhere, all of a sudden it starts to make a little more sense how this could be. People, I'm not claiming that this is a fact, that these are all facts, but I'm not claiming that it's not true either. I don't have a better explanation at this point, and I find it fascinating, to say the very least. I also can't help but look at what the ancient scholars leading up into modern times have done with the information, which is absolutely nothing, or at best they've suppressed it, edited it out, censored it. Nobody's offered it to us. No one ever told me anything like this when I was in school. Nobody ever told me anything like this when I was in church. So here's some food for thought. There's lots of good information on the internet that is available if you go digging for it like I did, and I encourage you to do so to satisfy yourself. The reasons that governments and the churches would suppress this information, I'll leave that to your imagination. A lot of people I've been talking to about this subject ask me, well, where did they go? Where did the Anunnaki go? Well, that's a good question. I mean, there's a group of people out there who believe they never left, and that the governments of our modern era are subservient to them still. The Anunnaki were big according to the clay tablets, on hierarchy and bloodlines. And there's been a lot made about all of the rulers of this planet in this day and age being predecessors of successive bloodlines that go all the way back to ancient times. Maybe it's true. We now know, because of these clay tablets, that the ancient Egyptian hieroglyphics and the Hebrew Bible and the Hindu writings, they all follow a path back to the writings that are contained on these ancient Sumerian clay tablets. They have a point of origin, and that point of origin has been kept from us, has not been shared with us. All of these other major pieces of writing now make a lot more sense in light of these missing facts. And I hope you share my enthusiasm, and you do take some time to do some thinking on this. If there happen to be a group of extraterrestrials that are controlling the leaders of our planet from the shadows, then it's the type of information that I'd certainly want to know about. If I'm being manipulated and controlled and treated as an ongoing part of a slave race, which was our origins in accordance with these texts, then that would be the first step towards securing freedom for myself, is recognizing beyond the shadow of a doubt that I was in fact being intentionally kept in bondage by my captors. I will leave you with a clip from the movie The Matrix. And I'll wish you well. Until next time. Bye for now.
The Matrix is a system, Neo. That system is our enemy. When you're inside, you look around, what do you see? Businessmen, teachers, lawyers, carpenters, the very minds of the people we are trying to save. But until we do, these people are still a part of that system, and that makes them our enemy. You have to understand, most of these people are not ready to be unplugged. And many of them are so inert, so hopelessly dependent on the system, that they will fight to protect it. Were you listening to me, Neo? Or were you looking at the woman in the red dress? I was. Look again. Freeze it.
This isn't the Matrix.
No. It's another training program designed to teach you one thing. If you are not one of us, you are one of them.
What are they?
Sentient programs. They can move in and out of any software still hardwired to their system. That means that anyone we haven't unplugged is potentially an agent. Inside the Matrix, they are everyone, and they are no one. We have survived by hiding from them, by running from them. But they are the gatekeepers. They are guarding all the doors, they are holding all the keys, which means that sooner or later, someone is going to have to fight them.
Someone.
I won't lie to you, Neo. Every single man or woman who has stood their ground, everyone who has fought an agent has died. But where they have failed, you will succeed.
Why?
I've seen an agent punch through a concrete wall. Men have emptied entire clips at them and hit nothing but air. Yet their strength and their speed are still based in a world that is built on rules. Because of that, they will never be as strong or as fast as you can be.
What are you trying to tell me? That I can dodge bullets?
No, Neo. I'm trying to tell you that when you're ready, you won't have to.